Quite a nice drive now.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys drove here. Now I know we're not quite behind the scenes yet, but this is our first stop on the tour. And I first want to answer one of our most common questions we get here at the aquarium, and that's why do we have turkey vultures at an aquarium? That's a good question, and that's to show off the Oregon Coast part of our name, the Oregon Coast Aquarium. We want to show off not only the animals that live in the water on our coast, but we also want to show off our coastal forests, which these turkey vultures are a great example of. These turkey vultures are a species that lives in North America throughout the warmer seasons of the year, but they'll actually be migrating down to Central America in the colder seasons like fall and winter. But these two turkey vultures in particular will actually be staying in Oregon year-round. That's because they were rehabilitated and deemed unreleasable. So these two turkey vultures, when they were just chicks, were actually found on the side of the road by a well-meaning family that had brought them in to try and take care of them. Although we don't know for sure if these turkey vultures were abandoned because they do lay their nests on the ground. But regardless, this family did mean well and tried to take care of them, although they quickly found out that turkey vultures don't make the best pets. So they did send them to a rehabilitation center near their home where they got checked up on. They were completely healthy and eating fine, but had been raised under human care basically at this point. So because of that, they were deemed unreleasable because they may not survive out on their own. So that's how they found their way here to the Oregon Coast Aquarium, where we can use them to teach people about their species. And they just celebrated their 16th birthday last month. So they've just had their sweet 16, and they will typically live to 15 or 20 years old out in the wild, but the oldest under human care reached 43 years old.
Wow.
You'll notice that lots of animals live a lot longer under human care from lack of predation and an abundance of food. But do you guys have any questions about our turkey vultures?
What do you feed them?
So we feed them pieces of mice and pieces of quail. We will freeze and thaw it, and then we'll cut it up into dime-sized pieces so that we can also use it for some training as well. We do training with most of our animals, and that includes target training. That's actually what we start off all of our animals with. And with our turkey vultures, that's basically a wooden stick with a green ball on the end that we put up for them to put their beak up against. Now once they do that, we give them a piece of food as a reward. That's why we cut it into dime-sized pieces so that we can easily reward them piece by piece. And they always have the option not to put their beak up against that target, but most of the time it's worth it for the food. But we will make sure that even if they're having an off day and they don't want to do training, we'll still give them all of the food that they need. So we give them quail and some mice, different things they might find out in the wild naturally dead. They actually have a great sense of smell for finding that food. They can smell up to a mile away if the wind conditions are right. That'd be like us being able to stand here and smell all of the food on the bayfront being cooked, which I wish I could. But do you guys have any more questions about our vultures?
Are they both male or both female? Or
They're a female and a male. So their names are Olive and Ichabod. They're a brother and sister pair. They've never shown any breeding behaviors, and we don't expect them to. In the wild, they would typically go out. They might have a way somehow to know the relatives, so they won't typically go for each other. But they do sometimes compete for food, as a brother and sister would do. Ichabod's a quicker eater, so we actually have to feed them separately whenever we're not doing training. Because if Ichabod finishes his food first, he'll start going after Olive's food.
All right.
If you guys are ready, we'll put on to our official behind the scenes next.
Okay.
Awesome.
Hope me fly again.
Big fly.
Yeah, I got some good ones with the SLR.
Now before we officially go behind the scenes, I do have a few rules for you guys. First, we'll be going behind our mammals. And as I mentioned before, we do some trainings with our animals, and our mammals, we use our voice and our hand signals as well. So I just ask you don't wave your hands around and you keep your voice low, but please raise your hand and ask questions. We also have some borders that are pretty obvious and hard to miss that we don't want to cross. Those can be either rope standing up or painted lines on the ground we want to avoid, just to give our workers and animals plenty of room. And videos and pictures are welcome. We just want to keep the flash off because it does bother a lot of our animals. If you have any questions about the rules, perfect.
Cool.
pools on your right are for our sea otters. This first one was somewhat newly built in 2019 for geriatric care and lots of veterinary training. And the second pool is the main behind-the-scenes holding pool for all of our otters. So we'll see if anyone's hanging out with us right now. Let's see. I'm not seeing anyone, but they do have access back here in case they ever want to come back and hang out or stay away from their brothers, because they do get a little feisty sometimes. So we make sure that they always have room back here so that they can either avoid guests if they don't want to be seen, or if they are maybe play fighting a little bit and one of them is being a little too rough, the other one can come back here as a way of saying, hey, that was too rough. If you do that again, then I won't play with you. Do you have any questions about our otters so far?
How do they get into this area? Do they swim under something? Or?
Yep, so that green grate, they can swim under.
Okay.
And sometimes we can close that up in case we need to have one alone back here so that we can do whatever checkups we might need to do. And we also have all of these toys here that we can give to our otters. We have toys in this black bucket here that we can give them to play with. And we also have these kiddie pools that we can give them and fill up with ice cubes. So they seem to enjoy playing around in kiddie pools filled with ice cubes. Not necessarily a natural behavior, but they seem to enjoy it, and it's not harmful to them at all. So we let them have it. These are different ways that we give them what we call enrichment. That's just a fancy way of saying giving them things to do, keeping them busy. We want to make sure that they're never getting bored, they're never getting upset with needing to live here.
There's one.
But they were all rehabilitated sea otters and deemed unreleasable, so that's why they're all here. They were actually all found down in Monterey Bay, California. They were all found down there at different times. But what's nice about Monterey Bay Aquarium is they have sort of a foster care system. Sea otters are endangered, so they have a way that they carry on to adult female otters that have been deemed unreleasable, and they use those female otters to raise any abandoned or beached sea otter pups so that they can be re-released into the wild, having been raised by their own kind. Now, whenever any of our otters were found beached down in Monterey Bay, all of their female otters were already taking care of babies, unfortunately. Or I guess fortunately, because they had so much room. But when our otters were found down there, they were preoccupied, but they knew to contact us and see if we had any room for an extra otter. So that's what happened with all three of our otters at different times. And we're unfortunately not female sea otters, so these otters won't be able to be re-released to the wild, but they are going to surf around on land. So these sea lions have a pelvic bone, which actually allows them to walk on their front flippers when they're on land. These seals, however, don't have that pelvic bone, but they can still move around on land, just like you're doing.
Yeah.
They sort of just hop around the ground. It looks very similar to an inchworm crawling along a leaf. And not only is it very funny to watch, but it has a very funny name as well, called galumphing. So if you're ever on the beach and you see a marine mammal walking along the ground on its front flippers, you know it's one of our sea lions. And if you see it taking a nice galumph along the beach, you know it's one of our seals. And this is another great example of an animal that lives longer under human care. These seals and sea lions also live to their late teens, just like the turkey vultures do. But we actually have Skinny here, born in 1975, making her 49 years old this year. Not only our oldest seal, but the oldest seal on record.
Wow.
And she is still thriving. She's very healthy and happy. And you may notice if you see her next to one of her other seals, her eyes are a little bit wider than the other seal's eyes. That's because she got some cataract surgery on her eyes a little bit ago. And one of the side effects of that was getting her eyes a little bit bigger. But we figure it's a fair trade for less pain and less risk of more pertinent injury. And Elvis used to have that red eye. This picture is from before we had it removed. But the reason we removed it was because it started to develop some cataracts as well. And he already couldn't see out of it, so we figured the best thing for him to reduce any pain was to just remove it completely. He already can't use it to see, so that was the best decision we made. And Tazzy here has two red eyes. So we're aiding with those using eye drops, just to make sure they don't develop any pain or any other problems like that. But he does have two red eyes, so he's actually completely blind, but he's gotten a pretty good handle on where his surroundings are in those pools. Now, these sea lions are pretty young. These seals and sea lions tend to develop those eye issues from all of the time they spend at the surface of the water, gathering lots of glare from the sun. But these sea lions, being pretty young, have not developed any eye issues yet. But we're still giving them eye drops. Do any of you guys have a guess on why we might be giving them eye drops? it is just pure H2O as a hint. So just pure water is what we're giving them. Sort of similar to one of our trainings we're doing with our otters.
Keeping out parasites?
Not quite keeping out parasites, but just like when with our otters, giving them gas mask with oxygen, we want to give these guys some pure water just to get them used to accepting those eye drops. Because if and when they develop some eye issues, they'll already be used to accepting those eye drops, so we can immediately just add medication to those eye drops and continue that training on. But we want to give them those eye drops even though they don't have any issues yet, because we want to hope for the best but prepare for the worst. Any questions about our pinnipeds? Here's also some of those other trainings we do, and here's an example of that target we use. Having that buoy on the end of the PVC pipe, we can use that to move them on to any of these other trainings that are all beneficial to certain veterinary checkups. One of them I want to point out specifically is having the seals paint with a brush. That is a very cute and fun behavior, and it actually teaches them to hold a dental plate in their mouth, which is great for dentist checkups. And we can actually do that with our seals, sea lions, and sea otters. Now, one other interesting thing about having our animals paint is it also supports them financially. So whenever we get these paintings from our animals, we actually sell them in our gift shop, and all of the proceeds from each painting goes back to whoever painted it. So if you guys check out our gift shop and you flip over any of those paintings, you'll actually see who painted it, and all of the proceeds from that painting will go back to the animal that painted it, whether it's buying them some extra toys or just buying them some extra treats for them to have. Now, you guys can choose your favorite artist, you can choose your favorite animal, or you can just choose not to buy one. I don't get any commissions, so I'm not going to make you guys buy any of our paintings. But do you guys have any questions about our trainings?
So do they all have nails on their front and back flippers? Is that
Yep, so we do trim, let's see if I can find it.
the top one on the left? Has
Thank
the-
you. Yeah, so they do have nails. That's a pretty interesting thing because we actually don't trim Skinny's nails. Not because she's old and they're growing slower or anything like that, but just because she has a different behavioral trait. Whenever she's on land, she'll actually do this with her flippers, which sort of trims them down on her own. So we don't really need to trim her nails as much as we do the other seals. But before working here, I didn't know seals had nails either. Any more questions about our trainings?
Is that Skinny that I can see laying out?
Yes, I think so. That's Skinny. So she's just enjoying the nice sunlight. She's maybe tanning a bit. But if you guys are ready, we can check out our next stop on the tour. This is usually our shortest stop on the tour just because we don't get many plumbers, but this is part of our water filtration system. So lots of zoos and aquariums that live more inland actually have to make their own salt water for their animals, but us being on the coast, we're lucky we can bring our water straight from Newport Bay. Even though it's the natural water our animals would live in out in the wild, we want to still clean it up for them and make it nice and healthy and clean. So we have these large sand filters that use artificial sand to filter out any macrobacteria in the water. We will also use UV and ozone rays to kill any microbacteria in the water. Now once we're done filtering that water through our animals' pools and we're ready to send it back out, we do just send it right back out to the bay, which ends up a lot cleaner than the way we found it, which I think is a great lesson for us all to leave things cleaner than the way we found it. Do you guys have any questions about our water filtration system?
How did you solve the bobbit worm problem?
The bobbit worm problem. I'm actually not sure. I've not even heard of that. So
You've never heard of a bobbit worm?
I have not. So if that is a problem nearby, there is some way that we've figured that out. But that is what I love about you guys asking questions on the tour. Either I know the answer and I get to teach you guys something, or you ask me something I've never even heard of and I get to learn something by looking it up later.
He's knowledgeable. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I know about bobbit worms. They're basically big worms that love to dig into the dirt, and they hang in there waiting for a fish with their jaws open. And they lash out and bring it back just that fast. They can decimate an entire aquarium if they get into a tank.
Okay.
So that's something to be aware of.
So my guess is there's probably certain filters we have that don't even let those in. If they are really big worms, and we can probably just have some finer filtering that lets water in without letting those worms in.
Yeah. It'd probably be the eggs, I imagine.
He's got something.
Yeah, I have an answer. So I did just look it up to double check, but we don't have bobbit worms in our waters. I could see how that would be a problem, but since we're just getting our water from the bay, it's not really something we have to worry about.
Okay.
But we do have some invertebrates coming up in our filters, so we can
Some of those invertebrates you mentioned are anemones and sea stars. We actually have a 2 weeks supply of water that we have actually right next to the parking lot. You guys saw a big mural with some sea animals on it. Right behind that are 2 large silos that carry 2 weeks worth of water for the whole aquarium in case there's an oil spill nearby or red tide bloom, which are just things we can't filter out. So we can use that backup supply. But we do have to do a routine cleaning of those 2 silos because microscopic anemones and sea stars will actually find their way in there and attach onto the side. So we have to clean those out, and whenever we find those anemones and sea stars, they end up in our indoor galleries and in our touch pool. So they decided to come to the aquarium, so we give them a nice job here.
Cool.
But yeah, the best way to avoid something is have it not be near us. So thankfully they're not native. But that would be... There is a blue mat on the ground we want to step on with both feet. And we do have some mammalogists still prepping some food in there, so we want to make sure we're giving them plenty of room. They'll be coming out this door.
Okay.
So is it okay if I line everyone out here?
Yeah.
So this kitchen feeds all of our animals and passages of the deep, which includes all of our sharks. And it also feeds all of the mammals that we just saw. Now one of those animals that this kitchen feeds is actually the most expensive to feed annually. Do any of you guys have a guess on who that might be? It is one of our mammals. Not quite the sea lions. So the sea lions and seals only eat about 2 to 3% of their body weight each day. But there's an animal that eats a lot more than that each day.
That'd be the sea otter, right?
It is the sea otters. They eat 25% of their body weight each day. So the sea lions only get 2 to 3 feeds a day, while the sea otters get 4 to 5 feeds a day. And our otters weigh about 50 pounds each, so we have to feed them about 12.5 to 15 pounds of food each day. That's because they have an incredibly high metabolism to stay nice and warm in these frigid waters. And they also have that really dense fur to keep them nice and dry. So even though they're staying dry, they survive. So one of the things we do is we actually add these supplements into their food. So these supplements are basically pills for our sharks, similar to pills you might feed your cat or dog. And we feed them to our sharks the exact same way you might feed pills for a cat or a dog. Can anyone guess how we do that? Hide it in their food, exactly. Now, can anyone guess what they do if they find it in their food? They spit it out, exactly. So they're one of the most feared animals by people, and they're scared to take their vitamins. But we do hide this in pretty much all of the food we feed them to make sure they're getting plenty of those vitamins. If they spit one out, then we'll still be giving them those vitamins in the other food that we're giving them, so that they get all of the nutrients they need. Better to give them too much than not enough. And that brand is really nice to have because they not only make supplements for sharks and rays, but they also make them for crocodiles and giraffes, our sea otters as well. They make them for plenty of different animals, so it's really nice to have them available. Do you guys have any questions about our kitchen so far? Now we because this kitchen is FDA approved, we actually can't feed any fish to our animals that are missing even a single scale. So if we come across those fish, we can't serve it to our animals for the same reason you would expect to find all of the scales on your fish when you go to a restaurant. Otherwise, you'll be a little concerned, especially if the waiter can't tell you how it lost those scales, then you'll just be kind of put off. So what we do with those fish, since we can't feed it to our animals, is we send them right over to our cafe so that we can feed them to our guests instead.
Yeah.
We don't really feed those to our guests. What we do with those fish, because we do want to use it, is we put it into a blender and we mix it up with some of those vitamins that I mentioned, and we'll make that into what's called a slurry, or I like to call it more of a milkshake. So we use that slurry for broadcast feeding for some of our smaller animals like our anchovies, who we can't keep track of each individual and how much they're eating. So it's a lot easier to just dump out enough food for all of them each day out of the week. As you can see up there for the schooling fish, in the afternoon we always give them that slurry. So that makes it a lot easier to make sure that we're giving them enough food and they all have access to that food. Because all of our other animals will just be able to get the scraps if we're giving our anchovies too much food. Do you guys have any final questions about our kitchen? Alright, so we're going to head back out the same door. You want to step on the blue mat again and close the feet. Now, as we head on over to our passages of the deep, I first want to point out this big building behind me. That is the freezer that I mentioned. So it extends to either side of the building, and as we walk past it, you'll see that first pipe past that first door. That's how deep it goes as well. So it's a huge walk-in freezer, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm scared to go in there out of fear of getting lost, but I am thankful to whoever restocks our kitchens for us. But I'm going to hand things over to Aiden as we head above our passages of the deep. I do want to recommend holding onto the handrail as we go up and down because the stairs are pretty steep.
Okay.
Alright, so, oh wow, that's loud. Alright, so as we reach the top of our stairs, I like to stop here not only to test my microphone before we go inside, but also to tell you guys a little bit about the aquarium's history. Now, back in the mid-90s, we had a pretty famous animal here. Does anyone know who that might be?
Keiko.
Keiko, yeah. So, if you don't know, the whale, the orca whale that was in Free Willy, was actually in the aquarium here a little bit as part of his rehabilitation process. So, has anyone seen Free Willy? Yeah, so if you've seen the movie, basically what you know is it's a little movie about how killer whales really shouldn't be kept in captivity, just mainly on a basis of their intelligence and how they live their lives out in the wild. But after watching that movie, people started to realize, you know, the actor that played Willy in the movie Keiko was actually living in a show park down in Mexico and not really experiencing the best quality of life down there. So a big group of people got together to raise a bunch of money to set Keiko free. And the aquarium was part of that process. The Keiko Willy Foundation was really the driving force behind that. And they raised enough money to build passages of the deep here, which was originally Keiko's tank. So you can see some remnants of that now, even though obviously we don't have Keiko anymore. But you can see this line here is actually the original boundaries of the tank. I think when it was first opened, it was all one tank. Justin, do you remember how many gallons that was? I think it was like 2.3 million. Yeah. Something like that. About. But they were all connected. Now it's 1.2 million gallons, so a little bit smaller. But back then it was enough to hold a whale. So there were a couple of things we did as part of that rehabilitation process. When Keiko first came to us, there were a couple of things that weren't quite ready to make him releasable. One of those things is that he was actually afraid of fish, which is, as you can imagine, a pretty big challenge in the wild. Another thing is that he couldn't hold his breath for very long, and to kind of fix that problem, we did something really interesting. Does anyone have any guesses what we might have done? Sometimes people like to say, like, oh, did you hold him down? No. We would actually play movies. So there's a large window down there, and we would hook up a TV screen for him, and we play some movies to keep him entertained. I believe some of his favorites were Land Before Time, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and actually the World Wrestling Foundation. So some pretty fun stuff like that. But after his time here, Keiko was released out into Iceland. Unfortunately, did pass away a couple years later, but that whole process really taught a lot about whale rehabilitation, and since then, orca whales have actually been released successfully from captivity, which is really cool. But that's pretty much a little bit of the history about Keiko. Does anyone have any questions on that? Cool, yeah, definitely a big part of our history, pretty neat. Before we head inside to Passage of the Deep, which is one of my favorite stops, I do want to remind you guys, it's a working area. So we may see divers or staff back there. We want to make sure they have enough space to do their jobs. And then as well as that, there are no guardrails on any of the pools. So we really don't want any accidental swims today. We're going to stay a good foot away from those. But if you guys are ready, we can head inside.
Oh wow, this is nice. Yeah. Whoa.
Alright, so when Justin asked me which part of the tour I'd like to take over, I decided I had to do Passage of the Deep just because it's so cool. It's definitely my favorite stop on the tour. This exhibit is really neat because it's kind of made to represent if you had superpowers and could walk out from the coast into gradually deeper waters. And also, you guys can come up this close, just about. We just don't want to cross any of the lines there. But it gives a really cool and unique view into the different habitats looking down at the ocean floor. We also have this big tunnel. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to walk through it yesterday, but it's a really cool opportunity to see these fish up close. But across this entire exhibit, 3 different habitats are represented. Like I said, each one kind of getting into deeper and deeper waters. So we start here in Orford Reef, which is home to rockfish, woolfeels, sea stars, anemones, a lot of those more shallower living animals. This exhibit is really cool too because it's representative of the dead rock feature Orford Oregon. Some of those south of here. So you can see those red rocks here in the middle there. Those are really characteristic of that habitat. So it's cool that we were able to do this in that. In the middle there is Halibut Patch. It's more of a sandy bottom habitat, featuring a shipwreck. It's kind of this idea of the different impacts that humans can have in the habitat that we experience through our actions. And then the last one is probably the one you guys are most familiar with, is our open sea tank, home to 4 different species of sharks, a couple of bat rays, and then a 6 school of anchovies. But I'll tell you guys first about Orford Reef here. So this is home to some of my favorite fish, which are often overlooked, and those are the rockfish. Now, one thing I really like about rockfish is that they have a super, super long lifespan. Does anyone have any guesses how long that might be? That's a good guess. It's actually much higher than that. The oldest recorded rockfish was 205 years old. And the way that they're able to reach such long lifespans is thanks to their lazy, or I would say over-positioned lifestyle. But in a rockfish's entire life, they really won't move much. Only stand as a life size of the living. So they're pretty reserved fish, and they tend to hang out in one spot. Another thing you'll notice, which a lot of our guests do notice, is that rockfish tend to hang kind of on their sides or even upside down. That's normal behavior for a rockfish, although that's often considered like that. When we're feeding this tank, we do it in a couple of different ways. All along this tour, we've talked about target training as one of the best options for training our animals. A lot of people do know that that works with smaller animals like our mammals and our birds, but fish are actually receptive to that as well. So with our woolfeels especially, we can dip a target into the water and go swim right up in the target. Another way in which we feed this tank is through broadcast feeding. Just like you might feed that goldfish at home, we make that slurry that Justin was telling us about in the kitchen, and we throw that out into the water for everybody to enjoy. One cool thing there is that we do mix garlic into that food. What that really does for us is overnight we keep the vampires out. But another purpose that has is it does change the chemical composition of the fish's blood, which can actually protect you against parasites. So that's just one of the things we picked up on and has made it really easier to take care of our animals. Does anyone have any questions about this Orford Reef tank here? So the rockfish, they can get a little bit territorial, especially kind of being in their own areas. Sometimes the larger fish will get together, but They're also somewhat, they're kind of harsh filters. They do like to have light, but they're also a little cold. So they like your fish, but they still want to have brightness. One cool thing connecting these two tanks is our med pool here. The med pool makes it a little bit easier to keep a close eye on our fish. Since we have so many fish in here and we can't always tell the difference between the different rockfish, it's best to kind of pull them out if we need a closer look. That's also connected to outlet flats, which is home to some of our flatfish and our sturgeon. And like I said earlier, there's a shipwreck in there, makes it represent the different impacts that we can have. I'll then go over to our open seas tank. Yeah, just on this yellow one here. So open seas is a 30-foot deep tank, just like these other ones. But there's not a lot of scenery in there, and that's because it's home to some of our pelagic animals, or our more open water animals. Home to 4 different species of sharks, the largest of which is the broad-nosed satin-gill. Also home to bat rays. So something kind of cool about the bat rays is that we use this med pool not only for the same purpose as the smaller med pool for the other two tanks, but mainly for feeding our bat rays. So that gate over there, pull right up, we'll turn on a red light, which I like to call the bat signal. That will lead all of our bat rays in here when it's time to eat. The main reason we're doing that in this tank instead of out there in the open tank is for cleaning purposes. Bat rays are notoriously messy ears. Instead of having shark teeth like a shark, they have 2 crushing plates inside their mouth that they use to crush up the shells of plants and crabs, different shell animals, and enjoy. So you can see all this white powder is actually left over from the feeding. So you can see just how messy they really are. So much easier in this tank for sure, although we do send out volunteer divers and some of our dive team to clean the bigger tank. It can be a little bit tricky, especially with so many sharks in there, but we do have ways around it and we've never had any issues. So the main thing that we'll do is we'll send our divers down with a buddy, and what the buddy does is, if someone does get eaten by a shark, we still can get the job done. But really they're keeping away the sharks. They'll use one of those black and white striped poles there, and they're on shark watch. So they'll keep an eye out for any sharks that get a little bit too close, and they'll gently nudge them away if they need to. Sharks have really bad eyesight, especially considering both of their eyes are on either side of their head, so they actually do have a blind spot right in the middle. So our divers will kind of move that side to side just to let them know we're coming. Being that they have such bad eyesight, they're kind of curious, and they don't have any hands to check stuff out, so usually they leave with their mouth. So the larger, like that pipe over there that's dumping water, that's mainly just to keep water moving throughout the tank. But then these top ones are actually just to kind of obscure the view of the tunnels. So without those, you can kind of see right out there. It looks a little less clear. It's mostly the same, and being that our water is coming from the bay, it's rich in all the oxygen and nutrients that they might need. But different tanks have different needs for sure. Especially with our jellyfish. We actually can't pump in any bubbles into their tanks, just because they're so fragile. The bubbles can actually get underneath their metal and rupture them. So it's all kind of a process of learning and making sure we're taking care of our different animals in the different ways that they need. Does anyone have any questions about the med pool here or the open seas tank? Another thing I would like to point out while we're over here is this steel beam coming across the ceiling here. If you guys remember at our life support stop down by all the sand filters, there was that white squirt on the ground. So that's actually how we're transporting any of the larger animals up in the air. So we can use that pulley system and kind of raise up the boxes and pull them along however we need be. So we don't use that all the time, I've never seen it, but it's pretty handy if we need to transport a big shark out of here. And then one more thing I do want to point out, I mentioned a lot of our divers are volunteers. Volunteering is really, really important for us here at the aquarium. We actually, I think this summer we have 251 volunteers. And with all those volunteers, they actually contribute as many hours as over 20 full-time employees. So without them, we really wouldn't be the same. I don't know if anyone's local, but we do have, it's pretty easy to get into that volunteering program. If anyone's interested, we're always trying to push that and advertise that. If there are no more questions about any of these tanks, the last thing I'll point out inside of Fast Dishes in the Deep here is our identification boards. which we can kind of head over there and take a closer look. Not really. The batteries will kind of come up sometimes, but none of these animals really like it. I like to point these out just because I think they're neat. But these are what our keepers use to keep track of all the animals. One way is with the rockfish, which don't have their own names, but we do keep track of them with our A's, F's, X, and N's, which just help keep tabs on who's in what tank and how many fish are in each tank. It's really important to keep track of that sort of thing for sure. Being that we have so many rockfish, this is also helpful for telling the different types apart. I have a lot of respect for my coworkers who can tell specifically the canary, yellow eye, and vermilion rockfish apart. Those ones can be a little bit tricky. I'll try not to talk about rockfish too much, but they are some of my favorites. So they actually have venomous barbs on their backs, as well as our spiny dogfish, which is a type of shark that we have out there. So being that we have so many venomous animals in these tanks alone, here at the aquarium we actually have one of the largest venomous animal collections in the world, which is pretty cool. Something you might not expect for an aquarium to have. I'll also point out some of these boards with our sharks on them, our toe sharks, our seven-gill sharks, and our surgeons, which aren't sharks, but they do still get names. The names help us keep track a little bit of our different sharks, make sure everyone's eating. They also have their own patterns and different looks, as well as their own behaviors. So those are all things that our keepers are very familiar with, and that helps keep tabs on everyone a little bit better. One that I like to point out is Jay there at the bottom, one of our broad-nosed seven-gills. He has a really cool behavior in which one of the windows down at the bottom of that tank, he always swims up halfway, and then pretty much every time he'll turn around. He's the only shark in here that does that, so you can always tell when Jay's swimming by. Another fun one is Winter, which isn't on the board right now, but Winter has a big white spot on her side, so you can always tell. It's kind of like a big snowflake. That's one of the easier ones to identify, so I like to point that out to you guys. But any questions about any of this stuff? Alright, cool. I'll unplug my microphone. I probably don't need it anymore, and we can head to our next stop. Before we go down the stairs, I'll point out a couple of different things. So you see all these warehouses? They're kind of ugly, and we can call them ugly. They were made to be temporary, but they've been up for as long as the aquarium has, so since May of 1992. But we're in the process of tearing those down, and I'll tell you guys a little bit about our future plans here. As we head over, I did want to talk a little bit about our future plans for the aquarium. So like I said, we're in the process of tearing down some of these old storage buildings. This one, big sand lot here, used to be actually offices for operations as well as some storage, but it's not there anymore, thankfully. And that's going to be the site for our new rehabilitation center. That's a pretty high priority for us, being that rehab is so important to us. We talk about it with our vultures, our pelicans, all of our marine mammals, just different animals that have come to us through that kind of program. But here at the aquarium, we haven't necessarily had the most capacity for that type of thing. We do just about every summer. We get sea turtles that come up, and they're not really supposed to be in these cold waters, so they end up cold stunned on our beaches. They need a little bit extra help, so usually we'll bring them in and help them, but we can really only take in 2 or 3 before we're really pushing our resources. Being that we're a non-profit, like I said, we really haven't had the capacity to expand that until now as part of our capital campaign project. So things like this, the BTS tour, admissions, any donations are really helpful in kind of funding that whole process. But on the Oregon coast as a whole, there are actually only 3 rehabilitation centers that can take in stranded wild animals. So up in Astoria, there's one in Corvallis, and then I'm actually not sure where the third one is, but pretty limited resources as far as helping any of those animals get back into the wild. And that's something we'd like to work on as we continue to update our facilities here. But any questions about any of that rehab stuff that we're working on? As we head into our bird holding area, we're going to meet 2 of our rehabbed animals. The first of which is Pip, who's a brown pelican, came to us from the East Coast, so I'll tell you a little bit about her once we see her. Another one is going to be Gus, who is a western gull. That's him now. He was stranded as a chick and went through one of those rehabilitation centers in Corvallis, actually at Chintimony Wildlife Center. They get tons and tons of gulls every year, usually without too much trouble, but Gus was one that became a little bit too close to his human caretakers and actually considers himself to be human nowadays. But if you guys are ready, we can head. We'll head come around here. There's a gate. We'll tell you all about our bird. So as we head inside here, I have 2 foot baths for y'all. The first one is just water, just to get any larger things off of our feet. The second one is a vet-safe solution called Virkon. It just helps keep our animals kind of separate, and there's like an avian flu outbreak right now, so we're just trying to be careful of that sort of thing.
Okay.
If anyone, I didn't check, if anyone has any open-toed shoes, you don't have to go all the way in, you can just kind of dip the bottoms in. So this is our bird holding area. Like I said, this is where our aviculturists or our bird keepers take care of all of our birds. So that's these 2 ambassadors in the back here, but also all of our aviary birds. They have some extra space where they can come back if need be. I'll start talking with Pip here, who's an eastern brown pelican. Did anyone happen to catch the pelican show today? So we usually do an 11:30 pelican show just about every day, where she will come out and do kind of her ambassador thing, teach the people and get a little training done. But one thing I really like about the birds back here is they kind of exemplify a couple of our key tenets here at the aquarium. So rehabilitation, enrichment, education, all of those sorts of things are represented by these birds. Pip being rehabilitated is a great example of that. So she came to us from the East Coast, all the way down in South Carolina. They can be found actually on both coasts. But she has an injury to one of her feet, which makes it a little bit difficult to survive as a wild pelican. Being that these are seabirds, they spend a lot of their time on the water, and having an injury like that to the foot can make it pretty difficult for her to take off. As well as that, brown pelicans are one of the only pelicans that plunge dives, which is a really unique hunting technique in which they'll fly 60 feet above the water, and then kind of scanning the water for any food. When they see it, they'll turn their head 45 degrees and actually do a straight dive to the water, which can be a little bit tricky for new pelicans to learn, and there are a lot of injuries from that. But her injury was actually from fishing line, so if you're not disposing of those things properly, they can hurt wildlife. And that's one of the main goals behind her ambassador program, is teaching that. So that white thing there in the back, that white tube, is a fishing line waste receptacle. So she is trained to go up and touch that little orange ball there with her bill, kind of remind people where to put their fishing line. But she's really great, one of our ambassador animals. She does a lot of training here with us to be part of that program. So training is a really good form of enrichment for her, getting her to participate in her own care, but we do other forms of enrichment too, just trying to mix up sights and sounds for her. We'll do wind chimes, even a disco ball is pretty fun, but she loves all that sort of stuff, and she has a lot of personality. Next up, I'll talk about Gus. He's kind of in that back enclosure there, so he might be a little tricky to see, but you might have the best chance if you guys come up to here. You sort of past the white line, but you can peek and see if you can spot him. Now, like I said, Gus is a western gull. Another victim of rehabilitation, unfortunately, and deemed non-releasable due to his friendliness with humans. But as far as Gus is concerned, he is a human. We give him a mirror sometimes to remind him. He has a lot of personality, and he loves our keepers. When they come in the morning, he's always sure to squawk at them, just like he did when we were walking by. One funny story I like to tell about him that kind of shows how he doesn't know he's a gull is that once upon a time there was a female gull who was pretty interested in him. So she would sit on the fence here and watch him, and one day she got close enough to throw up a squid for him, which he didn't care about at all, unfortunately. And it would have worked on me, but Gus was not as interested. He's not currently an ambassador animal. He's not going out on any shows, but he is being trained at the moment, and so hopefully he can be part of some of those educational programs as well. The last thing I'll point out in our bird holding area is these 3 little rooms on the side here. These are our birdie condos. Basically just an extra space for any rest and relaxation that our aviary birds might need. It helps too if we need to do any closer looks at them. One recent visitor to these spaces was actually a tufted puffin by the name of Miss Potts. Now she used to be named Mrs. Potts, but there is a lot of drama in the bird community. And just kind of a disclaimer, I will, and for the sake of storytelling, I'll kind of personify them a little bit more than I should, but you get the idea. So Miss Potts and Mr. Potts, tufted puffins are usually monogamous. However, Mr. Potts actually left her for a younger bird. Now it wasn't the cleanest separation either. He actually bullied her a lot, kicked her out of the nest, and even got her onto the path one time, which is not so good. So we decided to give her some extra space away from him and brought her back here for a little bit, which was nice for her, much needed. Since then, she has paired up with one of our oldest bachelors and then broken up and met a different bird actually, which is a bird of a different species, a horned puffin. So it gets pretty crazy. Our bird keepers love to keep us updated on that. We have a whiteboard back there with a kind of our own soap opera called All My Feathers. So it's really fun to hear about all of our birds. Do you guys have any last questions about any of the bird holding stuff or anything from the entire tour? Well, this has been our last stop. Hopefully by this point you guys are rehabilitated and ready to be re-released back out into the aquarium. If you guys are ready, we can head out.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
Alright, well thanks everybody for coming. Like I said, behind the scenes tours like this and that extra money that brings in really helps us take care of our animals and prepare for some of those larger projects. So really helpful that you guys were able to come along. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed your time.
We did. Thank you.
In this tank, instead of out there in the open tank, it's for cleaning purposes. Bat rays are notoriously messy ears. Instead of having sharkies like a shark, they have two crushing plates inside their mouth that they use to crush up the shells of plants and crabs, different shell animals. It's mostly the same, and being that our water is coming from the bay, it's rich in all the oxygen and nutrients that they might need. But especially one is with our jellyfish. We actually can't pump in any bubbles into their tanks, just because they're so fragile. The bubbles can actually get underneath their bell and rupture them. So it's all kind of a process of learning and making sure we're taking care of our different animals in the different ways that they need. Not really. The bat rays will kind of come up sometimes, but none of these things are good enough.